having me. This is great.
Beautiful. Thank you, Raquel. So Mike, good evening. So nice that you can join us tonight. My very first question is, how did you get started?
Yeah, so I can go really far back or just a little far back. So I went to school at the Art Institute of Philadelphia. I was an animation major for the first few months, and then I realized quickly that it wasn't for me at the time. That's what I thought. And then I switched over to the graphic design program, which was focused on like multimedia. And I got proficient in Flash. That's how old I am. And just learning the basics of the programs like InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, and Dreamweaver. That's how old I am as well. And after that, I graduated, had some jobs at some local shops, went to a bigger agency, and I wasn't really doing work that I wanted to. It wasn't as conceptual as I felt that I was better at. So after work and during like my night hours, I would just kind of pick away at things and concepts that I wanted to make and turn them into like just mini projects. And it gave me a chance to kind of flex my muscles on that. And then ended up putting a portfolio together of that type of work, which ended up getting me slightly better gigs. And I moved out to Chicago, worked at an agency. Then I went to a really small shop. And from there, I started getting cover inquiries and, op-ed illustration inquiries. Some where I would bug the art directors, others where they would come to me or see something I'd done with my personal work online. And then from there, I just decided to go out on my own. And that was, gosh, I think about 7.5, 8 years ago. So I've been on my own since, and moved from Chicago to Philadelphia. And now I'm in Richmond, Virginia, which is a cool little town. Yeah. And right from here, my practice is just doing conceptual work for publications, as well as collage work and abstracted work.
Raquel, can you put up the some of the images, Mike's images?
Yes, sure. Let me do that.
Yeah, while Lori is asking questions, it'd be great for people to see this amazing work.
Mike, as you were working on the side and developing your own ideas, right? What other designers, artists, sources were you looking at for inspiration, or what was inspiring you during that moment, during those times?
Great question. Yeah, when I knew I wanted to get into the more the illustration side of things, so I looked up to guys like the heads of state. Matt Dorfman was another one that I looked up to, and anything that was coming out of the New York Times at the time, like the book review covers, Sunday review covers. It was just a chance to be introduced to someone new that would inspire me and test how conceptual I could get with things. Or so I'd say, and on the art side, I looked up to like the simplicity of like John Baldessari's work, and the craziness of Rauschenberg's work. Also Ed Ruska, like just being conceptual in nature, was really attractive. So it kind of garnered influence there. And I'd say David Carson too, to some respect, was I found a lot of influence in at that time.
And were you imitating what you were seeing, or just analyzing what you were seeing? Like, how were you figuring out your elements and principles, or what media, or your aesthetic approach?
Sure. I mean, it would always start with, I just want to make that. But then the more I would do it, the more I wanted to deviate from that. And then I started to realize what was important about the work, and it always came back to either their process or their conceptual abilities. So I guess as I progressed, it went from copying and never showing because I didn't feel like I had any ownership over it, to using it as inspiration and then trying to figure out my own voice in it, or letting the concept lead where the execution went. That was probably the latter part of the, I guess, my copying escapade. And then from there, I just learned what were good tactics and methods for getting to good work. And it typically always leads with, know the piece you're making the work for, read it a few times if you have to, and try and surprise yourself with a concept that you wouldn't necessarily be like your first thought.
Right. And it's so interesting. I'm not going to ask you to define what you mean by conceptual work, right? Because it's a very interesting situation, and we'll see if people need a little bit more explanation. But of course, that has something to do with seeing and reading, right? Where you're letting the viewer, the reader, interpret it. You're not necessarily tying it up all together in an image.
I would say that's a huge part of what I try and achieve, is like letting you work for it and finding the meaning in it, as opposed to just hitting you over the head with it. So I guess in that way, it's all conceptual, right? But in that way, it's abstract. So
that's great.
So,
Go ahead, Ed.
So, Mike, I have a question. So, in most cases, you get these gigs from, a client, and you team up with an art director, and you talk about, what the objective is. And when I look at it as a collector, I look at your work and I see it as art, and I see it, I find it exhilarating and entertaining. But from a motivational point of view, is the primary motivation to inform? Is it to influence or persuade, or is it just to entertain people's eyeballs? Or if it's sort of all the above, what's the deal with the art director? Does the art director allow you to make those kinds of judgments, or is it something that is a negotiation? I mean,
Sure.
Is it propaganda, or is it something else?
Sure. I think it's kind of all of the above. Sometimes an art director will hire me strictly for style, and I think that's just to, draw attention to something, or give it something better than a Getty image. And then other times I'll get handed a manuscript or a few working titles and a synopsis, and I have to make an image out of that. And the goal is always to make a piece that not only supports the article, but can stand on its own, and you get a very similar story from it without the words. And that's always the practice. And I guess in that way, it helps, I guess, clarify the story, or give it, I guess, a little bit more meaning.
Right. So propaganda has it sounds negative, but it's really, it's a kind of a neutral term. It's persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you see yourself in the persuasion business, or are you someone who, feels that you're primarily, an artist, a designer, and it's the editorial content that's doing the initial persuasion? You're just amplifying that.
Right. I mean, I'm definitely I'm an artist first. And, whatever is happening in the world tends to be what I have to work on or work with. Like the Trump years, it was just a lot of Trump imagery. And after a while, you start to say, well, I know that this piece is putting him in a negative light, and I know that's what this artwork is supporting. But you can see how someone can use that artwork as a counter narrative or as almost like glorifying him as an individual. So it is a fine line between, propaganda and just making artwork to support an article. So I try and watch out for that. And these days I'm trying to make work that's a little bit more evergreen. You have to do a little bit more digging to get the concept, and less, less literal.
If we have time, it would be great, Laurie, it would be great to give Mike an opportunity to go through some of those images and kind of talk about, what they are, where they came from, what the article was. That'd be wonderful.
Well, thank you, Ed. So Mike, we have a question from our guests tonight, right, our audience, and they're interested in knowing more about your process. Could you, I think now might be a really good time to talk about that.
Cool. Yeah, so every project starts the same. A sketchbook, a lot of reading, sketching, list making, trying to get at what the heart of the piece is and what it's supposed to feel like. Like tone is very important. Is it a serious piece? Is it lighthearted? Is it a tearjerker? What emotions is it supposed to draw from the reader? And then from there, I typically will start almost everything by hand. That doesn't mean that it's going to have to come out as an analog collage in the end necessarily. I just find comping to be quicker, and there's more hand to eye to brain thing that happens with me, where I can put pieces together and make a bunch of comps quickly and move fast. And so I'll typically start there, and depending on where the concept leads me, it might take a U-turn and it's like, oh, well, this all needs to be digital now, or actually analog's perfect for this, or this type of imagery is working really well, or not. So I generally just let whatever's in the sketchbook lead the way, and then figure out the rest as I go. Sometimes I hobble through it, and sometimes it comes really quick. So.
And in your process, when do you start sharing this work with the art director, whoever's going to sign off on it?
Yeah, so it depends on the project. If it's an art director that I know and have worked with for a long time, I'll be as vulnerable as it can be and show things in working states. Other times, some art directors need things in a more final state. It's typically when they have to go and show the client something. If it's just an art director, I have no problem showing pencils sometimes, even though it's typically they come from me for some sort of collage, or just like kind of sometimes I've Frankensteined old works of mine together in a quick concept. Anything to just if it looks like, oh, you can gain what he's trying to do here from this. If it hits that mark, then I'll send it. If it's still a little murky, I'll refine it slightly, but it's not a perfect process.
Another question from the audience, asking a lot about the imagery the photographic imagery. How do you manage copyright? And how are you? What is your what's your strategy for generating that?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a ton of resources that are open source or public domain, and I usually searching around on those, or really old out of print magazines. Sometimes I'm allowed to use that stuff. Other times some publications are more strict with that. And for my personal work, it's anything is fair game as long as I turn it into a different image. That's my rule. If you can kind of tell where it came from, or it's too too much just a representation of the original image, then it won't work in my personal work because I want full ownership. And other times, if it's a piece about a particular individual or individuals, I'll be supplied the imagery. And sometimes you get a cool subject matter like Citizen Kane, and you get to work with all these great archival photos. And that's, yeah. Yeah.
And Mike, could you elaborate? Oh, yes.
Yes,
Raquel, go ahead.
I was going to suggest that since Mike is talking about process, that I would like to ask him to talk a little bit about this image. These two pieces of art about O.J. Simpson. We talked a little bit previously. We talked about it, and I really would like to hear you talking about your process.
Great, yeah. So again, it always starts with sketches. I feel like when you have such a recognizable figure like O.J. Simpson, you can do these types of things. So, this piece was about how O.J. Simpson was like pontificating on Twitter about jury selection out of all things. And the writer just wrote it in this way that like, it's just absurd that he was talking about jury selection being, his infamous case. Anyway, so it was a kind of a lighthearted, absurd piece. And I wanted there to be elements of, I guess wacky, but, not wacky is the wrong word, but just not taking itself too serious. And I found these like really great old images of people in the courthouse, and then it's cutting up OJ's face, and then this old leather chair. It was actually from a CSA image, and yeah, just kind of creating these dual images of him was a little jarring, like your eyes trying to put pieces of the one with the other, and there's something really interesting about that playfulness. And
yes, I think that it's really interesting that it works well as a series. It's like you keep going back and forth. Was it published as one piece, or was published like in 2 different pages? How was it this one used?
Yeah, so this is for New York Times Magazine Screenland section. And it's like a very long panel that they run across the spread. So I actually prefer there's more to this piece. It was these two, and then there was a hand that I like with a glove, which was from his infamous case. And I just kind of cut that up in a similar way. And I try and treat it like a triptych or like 4-panel. And that way I get nice movement across the illustration, because it is rather long in dimension. So
yeah, it is interesting that you mentioned it is a 2D static piece, but there is a lot of movement because, as you said, our eyes, the readers, we keep going back and forth on both images. So it's a really amazing job.
Oh yeah, and one more thing on this. It was about jury selection being mostly like white folks, hence the white dots in the chairs. So.
Oh yeah, wow,
That's
interesting. Yeah.
That is great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We have other questions from the audience that it would be interesting to share with you. We have a lot of questions. So here, you talked a little bit about your process already, but Karish is asking, at what point did you find collage as the medium for you? What led you to it? What were your explorations with media before this point? And also, she's asking if you believe collage is a medium for you that will evolve into something else as you go along. And so there are multiple questions, but if you could comment on that.
And just to add, Mike, add one more, would be how is your personal work might have something to do with this too. You could talk about that. Great.
Great. Yeah. that's a good point, because that's exactly what it is. So when I first started dabbling as an illustrator, it was a lot of drawing and a lot of trying to find a style, and trying to get at some sort of, I don't know, like mixture of imagery that got a point across. But then discovering guys like Heads of State and Matt Dorfman, it really just kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of image making, not so tied to like a specific aesthetic or style, but more or less like doing whatever's right for the concept. So that kind of led me into collage, because I felt there was a contemporary feeling to getting the point across with as little elements as possible. I really liked that practice. And it's, I have roots in graphic design, not in fine art. So collage was playing with scale, composition, color, introduction of typography in some sense, making something out of an image, so using restraint. So there are all these things that from my past, that I think collage made sense. I also had a stint, a few years, where I was doing a lot of screen printing and just like reproducing imagery, accidents that happen, and you're like, oh, this is cooler than what my original intent was. So that, just constantly playing and constantly being curious about this, just making art, always informs where I'm going next, right? Like, I don't know where I'll end up in a year or 2 or 5, but I'll just let my practicing and making personal work kind of guide my interests as I grow as an artist, I guess.
Mike, I want to follow up here, because there's several people in several places, people are asking about your art design historical sources, Dada, constructivism, heartfelt, Hanahaha, a lot of sources here. And I was surprised by your answer on Sunday when we first met and started talking about this. So the fact that obviously people are noticing or seeing historical works in your work, could you comment on that, please?
Oh, well, I mean, it's very flattering, but I'm definitely not like a historian on Dada. The farthest back I like to go is like Ed Ruska and John Baldessari's work. Like I feel like that generation of artists, and Robert Rauschenberg, just I'm trying to, I guess, pick up that and see where else it goes, and how does it apply? How is it applicable to our culture and our generation? And where else can it go? Like, how can I transform that into whatever would be new? That's kind of where I keep my head. Yeah. But it's flattering to hear that there's references made to that.
Mike, another interesting story you told us was about this series here with this women. So could you tell us how was the process of creating this series?
Yeah. So the photographs are taken of Sudanese women in a refugee camp by this amazing photographer, Giles Dooley. And he was working on a series where he was asking artists to reinterpret his work via collage, via painting, what have you. And so I was really, it was astonishing to hear the stories of these women and kind of hardships that they endured under civil war and corruption and just terrible things. And the fact that they were living in a refugee camp when these photos were taken, and they were getting together and doing their hair and in traditional styles that they weren't allowed to wear for many years because of conflict in their where they were living. And so I really just wanted to show the kind of emotional pains that they endured, but I wanted to keep it um, still beautiful and just not get in the way too much in this one. Really just wanted to show these women as they are, and then show these obstructions as these things that they're kind of seeing through, but have no doubt endured. Then there's parts that can be tied back to the camp that they're staying in. There's military manual things in there. And yeah, they're very powerful and near and dear to my heart, these ones. So
Yes, they are gorgeous.
Yeah.
The photographs are really beautiful. They're so expressive, and the collage highlights the them and these women in a very elegant and very it makes them just pop up from the page and be the center of this these pieces. There's really
Great.
really really
that was the goal.
gorgeous.
Yeah, that was the goal.
They're really
And
gorgeous.
these are all analog as well. So this is all done by hand. Yeah, and then I just scan them.
And this one's how big are they?
These, let's say 12 by 18,
Mm-hmm. And this is usually the size
something
that
around
you
there. That's not exact, but yeah.
do
Mounted.
you work around this size like a lot? Because there are larger there are larger pieces at the end that I want to share with the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I work with found materials a lot, so sometimes I can restrict the sizes of the pieces you build. But then in the example you have up, these are 5 foot by 7 foot pieces, and they were done for a co-working space in Dallas. And it's in a neighborhood called Deep Ellum. So we tried to create collages that represented the kind of interesting past of that area in Dallas. And the way this went down was I did small scale collages with elements that I had found. And then I got some of those images screen printed. Some of them were printed on like a glitch printer. So just like almost like Xeroxing in a way. And some were hand painted, like the numbers and the letter forms you see on both of these were all hand painted. And then I just took the plan from the smaller collage and started pasting these on larger boards that I had custom made by a guy here in town.
Wow. They are it's really interesting, this picture with the chair, because you can really have a sense of
Yeah.
scale. Do you have a preference between like working with pieces like this big or a smaller size?
I mean, working large is always fun, and it's always rewarding because it kind of engulfs you, and these pieces become, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it other than there's something about scale that does it for me. So I did enjoy working on these at this scale. And I think, the plan here in my studio is to do more of these, but be less rigorous about the planning process. So committing to a set of images, printing those images large scale, and then working with what I have and to make something out of it instead of having a plan before going in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what that'll do is it'll end up causing more repetition and more just visual cues that tie things together, and it won't be so individual each piece.
Yeah, Mike, there's a question, Maria asked about the, I guess, the ordering or the similarity, right, that you're working with, you started talking about. Maria sees geometry in the work. And she's asking, where does that influence or preference come from?
Interesting. That one I really don't have an answer for. I guess it kind of levels it off for me. Or if I do use organic shapes, you'll also see that they're very considered, and I'll do a bunch of cutting and I'll get to one shape and I'll just be obsessed with that shape as opposed to having a bunch of shapes. So maybe there's something in that restraint and editing that makes geometry make sense for me. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I just enjoy the way it looks when it's breaking up a composition or a photo or something a little bit more organic.
Raquel, there's a question up here from Radams Cordero, probably didn't pronounce the first name correctly, but a good question, really great question. What are you working on now next? What's next for you?
So in terms of assignments or?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, right now I'm working on a cover for a magazine, Pentagram. I'm working with an art director named Matt Willey. He's got a publication coming out called Ink, INQUE. And it comes out once a year, and then it ends at 10 years. So it has a shelf life already, which is cool. And it's really interesting written pieces. It's all about art and culture, and no advertisers, which allow them to have a lot of creative freedom, which is great. I got a book jacket manuscript that I'm reading that I can't say the title of. Kickoff with New York Times about something on Thursday. And I'm wrapping up some work for the Citizen Kane release for Criterion Collection.
Cool.
Yeah.
Again, we're having questions about your process, and this Allison asked a really good one, which is, what is the most frustrating part about your process, about the process for you? And then how do you get yourself unstuck?
Imposter syndrome is something I deal with quite a lot. I don't really know why. Maybe it's just how I'm made up. I never feel quite content or comfortable. Sometimes if you didn't know me, you'd be like, well, I don't know if you are happy, but I am, promise. I just tend to, imposter syndrome is a big thing for me, if I'm being honest. And the other thing is you have to be very vulnerable when you're an artist and you're doing work for publications or brands, in that you have to show them work, and nobody really knows what they're looking for. You can have a brief and you can have a great manuscript and a great understanding, and the next thing you know, this thing out of left field just works better, and there's no real explanation. And I think you have to get comfortable with showing those works. For a long time, I would always ask the question, like, well, what are they looking for? What are they looking for? And then once I let that go down and I said, what am I looking for? Or this is interesting, even though it's not exactly what we had intended. I think having the confidence to just show that stuff, 9 times out of 10, it's usually the stuff that gets through, and then everyone's excited. You're excited to make it because it's new to you, and the client's excited because it's going to help them, whatever their project is, and you grow as an artist. So yeah, I guess getting comfortable with being vulnerable and squashing imposter syndrome would be the most frustrating parts of what I do.
That's good to hear, because it makes you human, right?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Mike, Tim Carpenter has a great question about your workspace. So the question is, are you in your studio right now? And how important is your space to your work? The final part of the question is funny. Are you a collector hoarder like many collage artists?
Yes, this is my studio that you see. This is the front of the studio, which is more pretty, more designed. In the back studio, you kind of see the door here that's dark over my shoulder. That's where the hoarding and crazy mess is that I need and thrive on. I've found that the reason I think collage artists have a bunch of stuff on the table and around them is there's a lot of happenstance that can happen when you're maybe working on this project and you cut things up and it's not quite working for what you're trying to do with that project. And you kind of plop it down over to the left and there's other images over there that you were doing for something else. And then there's something that kind of happens and you're like, oh, and you just kind of, it's almost like you could put a collage together in 2 seconds and it's perfect. And you're like, and you just kind of leave it and you put it off to the side until you're done with your project. So I rely on that a lot too now. And so, yeah, being a mess is good. And hoarding, I have a ton of different magazines that are out of print, out of circulation. And I'm always trying to find new, more obscure type things where I can use images and have fun.
Cool. And where do you usually find your, where are your findings like more often?
You know, it's funny. It can be anything really. Like sometimes I'll get hung up on just really bad flyers that I see and it's not archival or old, or sometimes I'll get, like right now, and this isn't going to make any sense at all, but I am researching the filtration systems for pools. And there's something in it that I'm intrigued by. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'm just saying, I think I always try and, I always have an eye out for something, I guess, would be my answer. Sometimes, like eBay is a good source if you're looking to buy like old magazines and stuff, or just like going to flea markets or bookshops, that kind of thing. You can find a lot of really good resources, and that's typically where I find the bulk of what I have.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that it's more common that you, once you have like a job, that you're gonna go for, you're gonna try to find something specific, or it's more common that you collect a bunch of images and when you have a specific job, you work through your collection?
A mixture of both, depending on the project. You know, sometimes if I'm on an assignment that's really fast, I'll write a list based on the writing, the words, and then I'll just research those images. What are images attached to these words? And I'll just, as an exercise, put them together really fast and see. Sometimes I'll get lucky and it'll work. Other times it's like, oh, well, you know what? This kind of looks like it could be anything. It doesn't have to be from this era. It doesn't have to be this specific image. It can be an abstraction of it, or it can be represented in this way, or anyway, yeah. So whatever gets the juices flowing first, I guess, would be my answer to that.
Mike, I have a, if I can jump back in again for a second. Someone mentioned the amount of movement you have in the collages. And I wonder, since you started in animation, you've come all this distance in putting different found objects and your illustrations together. Do you see a way back to moving pictures, you know, to animation, pixelation? Do you see, do you have an appetite to apply what you've learned as a designer and a illustrator to, you know, invent or create a new form of you know, moving images?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. the fact that there's movement seen in my static collages, I can't really talk to whether that ties back to my very, very short stint in animation, but I definitely have an interest in animation. And I think as a medium, it's definitely a good thing to have and know. So maybe I will do more of that. I've definitely handed my work over to animators and have had it animated. But I would also imagine that it would change my process up quite a bit, because I don't think if something is static and it looks like there's movement in it, it doesn't necessarily translate to, well, does it look good if it's moving, right? So I think it's a field into its own and onto its own, and it's a difficult field. So maybe if I'm looking to completely switch it up, I'll look into it. But yeah, my remedial animation skills probably wouldn't do anything but that's worth showing to the world right now, currently.
Raquel, I want to, the last several questions submitted are interesting, and Javier, Jim, and Karish are talking more about, your editorial work. It's very, emotionally heavy. How does it take a toll on you? How do you step back from it, leave it at the end of your working day? Also definitely interested in hearing more, maybe what you have to say about art direction. And do you struggle with your own political point of view when you're asked to editorialize things that you might not agree with?
All great questions. Yes, sometimes, especially during when Trump was first elected, it was really tough for me. And then getting a lot of assignments about him and having to stare at his face. Definitely got these moments of just like, ugh, I don't want to do this. Not that it wasn't, the assignment was important and I felt the gravity of it, and I was grateful to be a part of the process. But after a while, you just, yeah, I guess you get like a PTSD type thing going on. And I always felt for the people that work at the New York Times, where it's like day in and day out, they have to, and they probably get more numb to it maybe. But yeah, I definitely am an emotional person, and it was something, especially when coronavirus thing hit, and you're being asked to make art about it. You're like, well, for me, I was like, can I, I don't know how much time I can spend with this. So I know that was the first question. And the second question?
Just stepping away, or talking more about art direction, and then stepping away. How do you relax? How do you keep fresh? How do you keep away from burnout? Yeah. Great.
Okay, so art direction, my favorite art directors, they're all great in their own respects wherever they are working. And if but the best assignments, I would say, are the ones that are a little bit more open-ended. There's no hey, here's a smattering of your work we think could work for this. I'm happy to do those assignments, but typically it's hard for me to think outside the box when I've already been shown the box, kind of thing. So I definitely like a more open brief, and when there's nothing figured out. And stepping away, I like to make art with my son. He's 6 years old, and I get a lot of inspiration from that, seeing this, just the creative flow that comes from a little kid is great. And basically right now, all my free time is with him. So him and my wife. So we'll usually go on hikes or do something on the weekends that's not focused on graphic design or illustration at all. It's not a perfect world. Sometimes it bleeds over. I typically try and work late nights during the week so I can have the weekends off. And sometimes I'll go on a bike ride and run if I really need to clear my head. And that's how I usually step away. But you have to step away. It's an important part. I don't agree with constantly working and churning. And I think you're never gonna, if you're not happy doing it, it's probably because you're just burnt out and you're doing too much of it. So
We do have a question about your bucket list. So commission, venues, publications. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, from Andrew.
okay.
Yeah.
Bucket list. I guess a big one would be to just start making work without clients. Like just I'm developing my own narratives and points of view on the world and things, and I would like to just make work, a bunch of it, and maybe it shows up in a gallery, or maybe I don't know. I don't know what the end goal for that would be, but that, and I guess I would always like to, put graphics on an airplane. That would be interesting to have or something that goes to space. That would be fun. Yeah. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe I'll just send something to space on my own.
There you go. I love that. That's the right attitude.
We have a question from Amanda Perez that I think is also very interesting. It's, are you ever given material or images that you should incorporate in your work?
Yes, much like the Giles Dooley piece, those images were supplied, and anytime it's about a specific individual and they have an archive of photos of this individual or thing or place in time, the art directors or photo editors will typically supply me with what they have. Sometimes it's an open-ended thing. Like I'll go and find them and see if we can use them. So we a good story on that is for Screenland, we were working on a piece. It was about the videos of Hart Island, where they were unfortunately burying a lot of the deceased from COVID-19 in New York. And it's got a long history. They were burying AIDS patients there a long time ago. And I found these really great photos, blanking on the photographer's name, but she took them during the AIDS epidemic and when they were doing a lot of burials on the island. And it was really tough to get photos of the island. There wasn't a lot available. So we reached out to her and were able to access some of her archival photos for the illustration. And things like that, where it's a little bit more legwork and everybody's on a timeline crunch. But if the idea is right, we all try and make it work.
Interesting. So there is collaboration, of course, right?
Always, yeah.
Yeah. Mike, I'd like to go back to your personal, and we only have a few minutes left. Okay. We have some questions that we can go a little bit further after 8, if that's okay with you. But one question that I wanted to ask you is about this series here, and I know it's a personal work. So do you see it big and large?
Yeah.
Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about this series?
Well, first off, sorry if I maybe put them in the wrong folder or something, but these were not personal works.
Okay.
These were, but which I'm glad that you went there. It's flattering that you felt that these could be personal works, because I do as well. But these were made, I don't know if you remember, also a Screenland piece here. They were made, I don't know if you remember the monoliths that were showing up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They were like those shiny objects. So there's a lot of like mystery around it, like who was doing it and what. And so, and that shape was just perfect. And so on the right, I did a cutout shape of the monolith, my interpretation of it. And then underneath it is a kind of invert of an image of a desert land. And it's kind of like kaleidoscoping in a way. So it's kind of weird. And then to the left, I did the kind of repetitive image in the background mirroring one another. And then that triangle in the middle is actually what the monolith looked like from an aerial view. So,
Mm.
but
Wow.
I don't have to tell you any of that. And
Mhm.
you can probably get a tone in a sense that it's kind of otherworldly, right? So
So you know what I read, like, I don't remember if this is a series of three pieces, right?
yes.
So, but seeing these two, the way they're presented here, I kind of see the symbol of the feminine because of the triangle,
Hmm.
and the masculine. So, and masculine. So it's funny the way it landed here, and it's amazing how gonna read it. Each reader is gonna read it the way he, she, or they want. So,
And I love that. And I
yeah.
aim for that. Yeah. So great.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mike. So we have time, I think, for maybe you want to do like 2 more questions.
Yeah, whatever. It's fine.
Awesome. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Chris von Bursk, are you able to shed any light on the financial aspect of what you do? And here's like a specific question about how much you charge, and I'm not sure you're going to be comfortable talking about that, but maybe sharing what's your process for, defining your the price, or how many you charge, like based on how many hours or how challenging it is to find resources.
Yeah, so it's all of the above. Some jobs pay very little, and some jobs for like ad agencies or bigger brands, they have a bigger budget. And things are usually priced by project because pricing by hour, I guess, is a good baseline for you to figure out what to charge, right? Um, but if I were to be honest about hours with clients, I don't know how many would hire me on the price tag that they would see, because there's a lot of hours that go into what I do. And I'm happy to get a fair amount of money for doing this type of work. And in terms of pricing, like I said, project based. Sometimes there's a rep involved if the agency so chooses to go through one. But I would say editorial work is low paying. So um, I would say if I'm doing a scale, editorial can be rather low paying. And then you get into working with specific brands and individuals, it pays a little better. And then ad agencies, campaigns, things like that pay great. And then every once in a while you get lucky and you get a commission to do actual pieces at 5 foot by 7 foot by a real estate company, and that pays great as well. So the money comes in from a lot of different areas, and I think as an artist you need to do that in order to survive. Unfortunately, I you know I don't know what it must have been like for those guys back in the day that were just doing editorial all the time and living comfortably. So mixing it up is kind of a necessity. I don't know if that answers the question really, but the lowest you can get paid, I think, is $300, and sometimes you can get paid up to like 90,000, 95,000 if you get a really good agent and a really good gig. So that would be a range. It's a big
great.
range.
Yeah, it's a big range. And I guess that answers. And Lori and Ed, would you like to ask something else from your side?
Lori?
Oh, I have one more, and it has to do with who owns the copyright. Like,
Oh.
that could be very helpful. And I'm thinking about Ed, you're a collector, and I'm thinking about or people starting to collect you, right? So practical and then aspiration.
Sure. So if you do something for an editorial piece, the copyright or the ownership that they have over it is just while it's in circulation. And then it's rights. They never have the rights. They own it for it's like rights managed, I guess, type deal. And then, you know, if you get into working with the guys at and women at like Apple and bigger brands like that, their contracts are definitely more, they want to own things outright because they have such a big network of people that might use that artwork for certain things. And it might be over a certain period of time, but typically it's like 5 years ownership. They would have ownership over the artwork. And that's why I tell illustrators to get used to pricing your work by like ownership. So just to give an example, this illustration will cost $1,000. If you want to own it for a year, there's a 25% mark on that. So 25% of the $1,000 on top of that $1,000, and then 50, and then outright ownership is 100%. So it costs $1,000 for the illustration, but if you want to own it outright, you need to pay me $2,000. A lot of big companies want to do a buyout, and you can make more money on your illustrations just by negotiating your contracts right.
Thank you. Very, very
And,
helpful.
yeah, in
I-
terms of
I
like
had-
collecting, I think Ed and a few other people maybe want something from me.
Mhm.
Not a ton.
I'm willing to walk from Baltimore to Richmond to,
I
I think your work as a collector, not as a practitioner, I think your work is highly collectible on a number of different levels. First of all, it is very contemporary, and it is not a, you know, an effort. It's not a, you know, an effort to create a vintage image, although I'm not the only one who sees, you know, Central Europe between the wars, whether you see it or not, your choice of colors, that kind of orangish red and black, and taking a look at what Mahalinaj was doing and what Piet Zwart was doing in the Netherlands. And someone mentioned John Hartfield. I mean, there are the choices that they made, interestingly enough, and the choices that you make, even if they're not really literally connected. I think they're very interesting and they're very similar, but they may be that they were the right choices. And so someone made it 80 years ago, and you're making those choices now without attempting to capture some kind of Bauhaus, you know, imagery. It's just, it's a very organic process. But
yeah, thank you. Yeah.
yeah, but it's interesting that when you mention the people and the artists and the designers that you look to for inspiration, that none of the people that I just mentioned show up on that A list, but there is so much similarity, and I don't know if that's a question or it's something to ponder, that are we living through a period that necessitates a kind of art, a kind of movement in art, a kind of a cross between commercial and more pure fine art. And we may be reliving it in an artistic sense without the intention of reliving it. So I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, maybe. No, I tend to agree. I don't know if I care so much if it's fine art or commercial art, as long as it's like effective and just kind of draws me in. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I just let things inspire me, and then I use my intuition and eye to fuss over details long enough till it looks good or looks new. Good is a bad word. Like I don't really, the older I get, the more I really don't care about it pleasing my aesthetics, like the taste I have in certain aesthetic things, and more so just surprising me and feeling like I kind of stumbled onto something. That's where I try and keep my head, and I think that maybe I'll progress to something different than what I'm doing now in just a year. I don't know. I like that open-endedness. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I want to thank you so much, Mike. We we're gonna wrap up now,
Great.
but thank you, Mike, for this opportunity to, to talk, to share with us your process and your thoughts about your work. And thank you, Ed, for making the connection between, us and SODA and AIGA Baltimore. Thank you, Lori, so much for co-hosting this event. Thank you all for attending this,
Yes,
for the
thank you.
participants. Thank you. And Mike,
Yeah.
do you want to say a few words and, before we all leave?
Yeah, I'm extremely flattered that you all thought of me for this, and I'm glad everybody had such great, thoughtful questions. And hopefully I didn't, stammer on too long. And yeah, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Cool.
Thank you,
Good night,
Raquel.
everyone.
Beautiful work.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take
Take
care.
care.